Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/new warehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I'm going to be joined by Jamie Dorland. He is a construction executive at Caddell Construction. And we're going to talk, he guessed it, construction. So we're going to talk about construction in regards to warehouses and putting up new buildings, retrofits around automation, what to look for, what areas are popular for development right now, and what are people doing when it comes to building new buildings and looking at the overall industrial warehouse landscape. And I think this would be pretty interesting because we have never had anybody from the construction world on the show before, but obviously it is a huge component when it comes to warehousing. I know in my area, they're building warehouses all the time, and there's definitely a lot of pockets around the country where that's happening. So we're going to dive into this a little bit with Jamie. So Jamie, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great, Kevin. Thank you very much for having me.
Definitely happy to have you on. Happy to talk about this. I think, it's a very key and core component to warehouses, because obviously if we don't build a warehouse, we don't have a warehouse, right? So I think before we kind of dive into some of these topics, why don't you just give us a little brief overview of Caddell Construction and what it is that you all do?
So Cadell is a construction firm celebrating our 40-year anniversary this year.
Congratulations.
Headquarters, thank you very much. Headquarters based out of Montgomery, Alabama, and we have offices in Bentonville, Arkansas, Jacksonville, Florida, Woodstock, Georgia, and new office just opening up in Phoenix, Arizona.
Nice.
As a company, we really are comprised of three major business units: an international, a governmental, and a commercial. Our international focuses heavily on the U.S. embassies and consulates. Our governmental group does a lot of correctional facilities, military bases, barracks, things like that. Okay. And the commercial group, which is the group that I'm based with, does a lot of warehousing, data center work, more traditional type commercial projects.
All right. Very interesting. So definitely a lot of construction going on. And obviously we're interested in focusing on the warehouse construction side of things today, since we are the New Warehouse Podcast, right? So tell us a little bit about kind of that area of focus and how you're focused on that. I mean, is it mostly new builds, or is it working on existing buildings, maybe making them bigger or raising the roof in some instances? I mean, how are you involved there?
Yes, sir. So at Cadell itself, we do pretty much all aspects of the various types of projects. Mm-hmm. I lead our automation business unit, which is a subunit of our commercial group. And really our mission has been focused on mainly retrofits right now. But as the market continues to evolve and the technology, there's always a transitionary period. So clients are consistently looking at new build versus retrofit. So we spend a lot of time in the pre-construction realm evaluating those different components and strategies and identifying, what the pros and cons of each for the given scenarios. Really right now, a big part of the market is the retrofit, and there's a lot of real estate that's been built in the last several years, and there's a lot of existing infrastructure that the clients have. And for the most part, they want to start out evaluating and trying to use the investment that they've already made. What's kind of driving some of the new construction is the European technology as it relates to automation systems. They're in the process, or have been for several years, going vertical. And so while most of the systems in the United States are, 40-foot structure, 36-foot high systems, there's a lot of intrigue now as we're evaluating new builds to go 60-foot or even 110. And so that's probably the biggest driving factor between retrofits and new build, is on the new build portion, looking to start to maximize the availability to go vertical with the real estate. Yeah.
Interesting. So I'm curious about that on the, when you go to 60 foot, 110 foot, I mean, that's a tall building, right? So, what are some of the, when I look around at the warehouses around me, they're looking at, 30, 40 foot clear kind of. When you look at a 60 foot and even going up to 110 foot, what are some of the things that are different about putting a building together like that structurally that wouldn't necessarily be in place for what we've kind of traditionally seen for a while in terms of height?
In general, not a lot of difference up to the 60-foot level. At the 110, it gets a little bit more unique in regards to the high rise, exposure aspect of it. And it really comes down to the design of the system, and the different components or the code requirements you might need to meet. But really, from a construction standpoint, from our perspective, it's not a whole lot different, if that makes sense. You need more material, you need some bigger equipment, but in general, the constructability is relatively the same.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I was just curious, if there was any, if you're looking from an operator perspective, if there's any additional types of beams or support structures or anything internally like that you would have to think about navigating around.
Yes, sir. There is a significant, mainly, mezzanine type structure on the taller builds.
Interesting. And I'm curious too. When you talk about buildings of that height, because there's a lot of discussion around, where warehouses and fulfillment centers are being located now. When you see companies talking about doing these, taller buildings, are they mostly looking to put them closer to highly populated areas because real estate is more expensive, so they're trying to take advantage of that, or is it just kind of all over the place?
Yeah, I think it's that, and a little bit of all over the place as well. Really, each client is strategically identifying locations, and I think with some clients there is a focus to get closer to those metropolitan areas, and to have the larger traditional type distribution centers is becoming much more difficult.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I was curious about that because I know as there's a lot of push for faster delivery and things like that. We try to move closer to the customer, and oftentimes the real estate gets more expensive closer to the customer. So you got to kind of maximize and go up. But it's interesting seeing it kind of blanket all across. And when we look at that, I mean, obviously, if you're looking at a 110-foot building, it's typically new build, I would assume. But you mentioned in there looking at retrofits, and you're seeing a lot of requests for these retrofits. So tell us a little bit about kind of, if I have an existing building or existing buildings and I'm looking to bring in some of these newer automation solutions, or just looking to maybe expand upon those buildings themselves in some way, what does that kind of involve, and what does a retrofit really look like from you? I mean, what does that mean for my operations, and what does it mean kind of in terms of like a project scope there?
Yes, sir. So it really starts with understanding what the client needs. And a lot of times also in the current world of automation, the engineering and procurement method is definitely evolving, or there's, a lot of differences between the clients and what they're traditionally used to. And so most of the time right now, the client, whether it's a wholesaler, a large national retailer, they are contracting directly with the automation vendor and collaborating on the size and the equipment configuration. And then previously, we were getting brought in late in the game. So after the automation vendor had a chance to, really get alignment with the client on the size of the system and what those requirements were, then they would bring in a construction team to, basically, bid the drawings and then go perform the early infrastructure work. It feels like in the last year and a half, we've had an opportunity to be brought into that much sooner during the design phase. And then the way that it's transitioning right now is we're going to start to be contracted to many of these automation vendors directly. And so more of a turnkey approach to not only support the infrastructure, but then also support their installation itself. And so it really, kind of going back to the question, it starts with understanding what the client needs. And that's a lot of times driven by space constraints or productivity goals. And there's a lot of discussion regarding, system type, configuration. And once a general idea is established, we're able to get brought in early in the design aspect to, start to identify some of the challenges with the current configuration. We don't end up a lot of times driving changes in that regard, but it's more about being able to be transparent with what the challenges are, whether that's, we're really close to some existing footings and we're going to undermine, or whether that's some additional structure needed for the way that they're going to support some of their equipment. And so we don't come into it trying to create revisions to their system. We really, because there's a lot of engineering involved with the size of those systems are driven by the size of the bots. And so you can shift the whole system a little bit, but you can't really start to separate some of the components, if that makes sense. And so we get to be brought in early and really just start that collaboration phase, start understanding what the limitations or restrictions are from the various automation vendors, because they're all different. They all want to access their work a particular way as far as during installation. So a lot of my focus and Cadell's focus right now on that world is regarding supporting the automation vendors' mobilization, installation, and infrastructure requirements to support their commissioning, activation, implementation to go live sequence.
Interesting. And I think it's smart that you've seen this shift towards having you get involved earlier in the process. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense because, like you said, there's a ton of engineering involved, and you want to understand if there's going to be any additional challenges, like kind of around that in the beginning. But also, I think understand too, like what does this look like, and try and figure out how do we lay out this building in the way that makes sense around the solution as well. So, I mean, in that sense, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of, are you seeing that customers are engaging you because they just want to build out like a traditional building, or are you seeing more and more requests to build out buildings that will start with automated solutions in place?
I would say it's still probably 50-50. We get engaged in a lot of different aspects of the warehouse market. Myself, I would say 95% of those requests are driven around automation though. And so there's, whether it's, converting an ambient facility to a cold storage facility, there's other aspects of automation that the clients are considering and interested in. And a big reason for really bringing the construction team in early enough is, supporting with that, the mobilization, lay down yard and preparatory requirements, but also on the design side, our responsibility, primarily can be boiled down to, we need to establish the infrastructure needed to support the automation vendor scope. And that's really concrete, electrical, compressed air, and fire sprinkler. There's some other aspects. There's light amount of finishes. Usually there's a control room or a UPS room. But the biggest cost components and the longest lead times and the longest installation times revolve around the electrical and compressed air components. And really the electrical is what the design of the automation and being brought in early. That's one of the big benefits that we have, is the direct engagement between the automation vendor and the engineer of record regarding the different types of electrical components, what their maximum load's going to be, because that's a driving factor in availability of a lot of different size switchgear, ensuring that we don't oversize, and then also collaborating with the client if additional phases are desired. Do they want redundancy? Do they want built-in extra capacity? And so those are all conversations that are great to have at the front end while we're in design of the project.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, with those automation solutions, electrical is a huge component, right, to get right and to understand that. I think it's pretty interesting because, we talk about so much of this high-tech solutions and automation solutions now in our space, and they become pretty prevalent and almost, starting to become necessary for many companies to be able to compete and keep up and deal with some of the challenges that are out there in the market right now. But, when it comes down to it, you're talking about some of the basic parts of the structure there, which is, the concrete and the electrical. So, I'm curious from your perspective, and I guess, dealing with, multiple developments and things like that. What are some of the things that companies that are, going out to have new buildings built or have their buildings retrofitted, whatever the case may be? What are some of the most common things that people are either not thinking about when they think about the scope of the project, or things that are overlooked and end up being kind of a change later on? Great question.
From sticking with the retrofit world, what we see a lot is the clients are very engaged in understanding regarding identification of the right technology, what the improvement to their operations will be, and really starting to generate some data behind, productivity increase, let's say. And then there's the aspect of, okay, now we've identified the certain square foot and the location within the building. And so they are really focused on and the ramp down aspect of, their operations. They know that for a period of time, they're no longer going to have the capacity that they've had. So they need to ramp down and then start to operate at that lower capacity for a given period of time. But there's other aspects to, I'd say disruptions to their operation that might not be as well known during those initial design and operational items. And it more comes down to, a lot of times these warehouses have, existing infrastructure located within the confines of the new build. And so those need to be relocated out. And a lot of those are electrical in nature, so they require shutdowns. And so a lot of times those shutdowns end up, affecting operational items outside of the current work zone, whether that's high bay lights, whether that's, dock levelers, whether that's a pick module. And so, being very intentional from mobilization with the identification of what those circuits are so that we can lead the shutdown and relocation with minimal disruption. And so we get to communicate in advance what the anticipated disruption is and then go execute to those timelines. So a lot of times we'll get a 5, an 8, or a 12-hour shutdown window. And so those are things that as we, mobilize and as we start to engage with the existing operations team, they weren't necessarily thinking about or, understanding that other aspects of their operation will have minor disruption. It ends up not being a problem because just that we get to mobilize, we get to communicate and collaborate. Hey, maybe this is, our desired shutdown is Thursday night, but for the operation team at this particular, distribution center or warehouse, they really would like us to do it Saturday night or Monday night. And so we get to, shift as needed to minimize what that impact is. So that's one aspect. Other aspects are a lot of times some of the infrastructure requirements are fed from outside of the work area. And so while it doesn't cause a disruption, there's many times where, throughout a, 2 or 4 week period, some of our activities are beyond our barrier wall, whether that's we're running compressed air through the middle of the facility to go tie into an existing air farm. And so we don't cause disruption to them, but they end up seeing more construction people than they were anticipating to see. And sometimes that in of itself can create some challenges for them because now people are asking questions. They're curious to what's going on. So it creates more interface between construction and operation personnel, which is something that you try to avoid.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it is interesting in that aspect because there's definitely like times where, you're thinking like, okay, well, we're going to do this project on the building and, it's going to happen on this side of the building and we'll be able to just completely, continue what we're doing, fulfilling orders on this side of the building. And like you said, there's stuff that comes up where, you don't think about if you're not from a construction background or something like that, or just in the operations, like, okay, we need to shut down the power, right? And for things like that, like how do we navigate around that? So I think that's really, really good, really insightful there. And I'm curious too, from a perspective of construction, I mean, what are you seeing right now? I mean, aside from the automation, discussion that we've been having around, people looking to either retrofit for automation projects or new automation projects. I mean, what do you guys see aside from that people are looking for as they're building out buildings? I mean, is there certain structural things that people are requesting now or looking for to be able to either maximize space or maybe do something that's an improvement that makes the employees' lives better within the building? I mean, what types of things are people kind of requesting, or what's popular right now in that sense?
Yes, sir. So I think from our perspective right now, the requests don't come across as unique or, out of the box, let's say. A lot of the conversations regarding it, if they've identified that a retrofit, works best for them, which is honestly where a lot of clients start. They already have an existing structure with some level of infrastructure with an operations team. And so they try to leverage that to, from my perspective, I think better understand what the technology is and how it can, support their business. Maybe that technology and those vendors have started to gain some traction. The client is seeing the benefit, and now it takes some of our clients to another level of, okay, we've validated that we are getting the return. Now we want to look at, expanding the footprint versus just, utilizing the existing footprint we have. And so when those conversations have started, I think a lot of it, revolves around just a couple of things is, expansion capabilities and capacity or redundancy requirements. And so, with expansion, and do you bring in all your additional switch gear now? And while it might be underloaded, it'll be ready for a future phase. that they might not have capital funding for or a commitment from leadership for. So there ends up a lot of times being a lot of, pre-construction services and estimating that are done for things that don't ever really happen. But it generates data that is needed for evaluation with either a board or a leadership group. And so, truthfully, a lot of stuff really never comes to life, but it feels like there's always some level of evaluation going on, based on a lot of different components. Again, what maybe a client's looking to get into a new market. Are they looking to replace a facility?
Interesting. Yeah. I think it's very interesting because I've certainly been in that situation before where we're like, as from a warehouse management perspective, where we're like, this would be nice to have. Let's try and get this in the project. And then, like you said, it's like, it never happens, right? Because you don't get that approval to spend the money or something like that. But it's good to understand that and be able to see that for future reasons too, as well. So it's a very interesting stuff there. And you mentioned in there, if a client wants to look into entering a new market and building a building there, are there any markets that you're seeing right now where there's kind of a high demand for a new construction? It
seems like there's definitely a focus within the market on cold storage facilities, and how the automation vendors are reacting and supporting that environment. It's a pretty tough environment, but from our perspective, that's something that seems to be gaining some traction and some momentum.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely high demand out there for cold storage space. I know a couple of people working in cold storage, and they're having a hard time finding extra space for their product. So very interesting. And before we close out here, I'm curious, as we look at engaging with contractors from a company perspective, from the warehouse operations manager's perspective to do projects, what should a company be looking for in a contractor when it comes to either doing a retrofit or a new build? What would you say is probably the most important thing to find in that partnership?
Somebody that you can trust that will give you honest feedback. I think there's a lot of contractors, that'll say that they can do it exactly how, that's being proposed, and just being able to hear what the real challenges are, how those challenges or, anomalies of a project type affect the associated project costs, so they're not caught off guard, in dealing with the change after the fact. And really, our group in particular prides ourselves on, no change order type mentality. We like to be upfront. We've done this enough to understand what many of the challenges are. There's always some unforeseen conditions. A lot of times you capture budget for that, and whether that's on the construction side or the owner side, just having a partner that's real transparent, and open to coordination and collaboration. And probably the next biggest thing is, while we might be hired directly from that wholesaler or the retailer, we also approach the projects like we work for the automation vendor. While we don't have a contract with them in a lot of the current aspects, we are on the site to prepare everything for them. And so if they're not successful in their mobilization, in their installation, then the project's not successful. And so we take as much pride in supporting the automation vendor, understanding, not only what their product is, but how do they need to mobilize, how do they need to receive deliveries, how do they need to bring material into the building, and what do they need to support the installation and commissioning aspect of their system. We take a lot of pride in that knowledge and support.
All right. Great stuff. And definitely very interesting insights from you here, Jamie, and definitely very interesting to hear about what's going on from a construction perspective. Because like I said in the beginning, if we don't build them, then we don't have them. Right. So we have nowhere to store our goods or do fulfillment or anything like that. So it's very interesting to hear kind of what's going on in the space and all those different things. So really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about this and everything construction within the warehouse world. If people are interested in getting in touch with you or learning more about Caddell Construction, what's the best way to do that?
They can reach out to me. My email's Jamie, Jamie, .Dorland, Dorland, at Cadell, CADDELL.com, or my phone number is 970-286-3156.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well so people can easily find it. So, Jamie, thank you once again for coming on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.